Hi everyone, my name's Daisy Goodwin and I work for the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. The Department's Aboriginal Economic Development Unit is offering support to Aboriginal stakeholders interested in carbon farming in Western Australia. We have recently prepared a guide on human-induced regeneration carbon farming, which is a type of carbon farming, and this guide is called Setting Up for Success Human-Induced Regeneration Carbon Farming. The guide's available on our website, but if you'd like an electronic or a hard copy, you can email our team at aed@dpird.wa.gov.au. So that's aed@dpird.wa.gov.au, or you can call my mobile personally, and that's on 0459 867 908, 0459 867 908. So either of those, if you'd like to have a chat to us about carbon farming, you can email or call if you have any questions at all, and we'll help you get the information or the advice that you're looking for. Okay. So today I'll be talking through a presentation we've developed for Aboriginal stakeholders on human-induced regeneration carbon farming, or HIR carbon farming. And you can also contact us for a copy of this PowerPoint as well, owners of the land on which I'm recording this presentation. And I'd like to recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, to elders both past and present. So welcome to this information session on HIR carbon farming, which is for Aboriginal stakeholders in the southern rangelands of Western Australia. So carbon farming presents an opportunity for Aboriginal pastoral lessees and native title holders to create a new income stream, regenerate the environment, build skills and work on country. However, there are risks involved in undertaking these complex long-term carbon farming projects. So this presentation today will simplify the process and highlight opportunities and risks presented by carbon farming for Aboriginal pastoral lessees and native title holders, as well as going through a lot of the information that we present in the Setting Up for Success Human-Induced Regeneration Carbon Farming Guide. So the purpose of this is to ensure independent advice is available to people interested in carbon farming on Aboriginal pastoral lessees or native title lands. So, HIR carbon farming, or human-induced regeneration, as we've mentioned, can now take place on pastoral leases in Western Australia, and it has for a little while now. So, areas of the southern rangelands are particularly suitable to this type of carbon farming. Carbon farming projects are very complex, and you might need help to understand what carbon farming projects are and what your rights are in relation to them. Additionally, people or organisations who talk to you about carbon farming projects might not give you the whole story. So we always encourage everyone considering taking part in a carbon farming project to contact the Aboriginal Economic Development Unit for independent support, assistance and advice. Okay, so if you want to start a carbon farming project on your land, you may have certain rights. For example, Aboriginal pastoral lessees and registered native title body corporates with a determined native title claim over land that may be used in a carbon farming project are considered eligible interest holders. We'll go through this a lot more later, but basically this means that if you're an eligible interest holder, you have the right to say yes or no to anyone wanting to undertake a carbon farming project on your land. Additionally, if project developers want to work with you, they should go through a free, prior and informed consent process, and we'll talk about this later. So concluding our introduction, HIR carbon farming can create financial, social and environmental opportunities for Aboriginal stakeholders. However, there is no rush to signing up for a carbon farming project, and now is not the last or the only time that you'll be able to start a carbon farming project. This opportunity will be around for you for a long time. So I just want to say again that interested parties are recommended to seek independent support, assistance and advice from our team to ensure that participating Aboriginal pastoral lessees and native title holders receive community and financial benefits from carbon farming projects, as they should be able to. So we'll get started now into the main section. And first we're going to talk about what carbon is. So when people are talking about carbon, they're usually referring to carbon dioxide. And this is a greenhouse gas that's released into the atmosphere through multiple activities, including the clearing of bush to build cities and grow food, the burning of fossil fuels to run cars and create energy. Carbon dioxide is a naturally occurring greenhouse gas. Other greenhouse gases include water vapour, methane, and nitrous oxide. These gases help the Earth warm by absorbing the sun's energy and redirecting energy back to the Earth's surface. So if you look on this slide here, in the first box we see the atmosphere and there's all these little dots. These are basically greenhouse gases, and this is a diagram trying to represent this. If you see in the second picture, the sun comes down to warm the Earth, and these greenhouse gases trap some of it. Generally, some of this heat would go back to Earth and things would stay a pretty constant temperature. However, as we've had more and more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, more of this heat has been trapped in the atmosphere, as you can see in the third image. So a lot more of these gases stay within the atmosphere rather than going back into outer space. So as a result of this, we have global warming as well as climate change, which is a different phenomenon, which I'll explain in a second. So what's the problem with making the Earth too warm? The Earth's heating up and our environment and its ecosystems are being threatened by this warming. Ice is melting at poles, glaciers, and frozen ground and increasing sea level, which releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So there's carbon everywhere. Carbon is trapped in the ice, which is now melting because it's getting too hot. This means the sea levels are rising and more carbon is being released into the air. So unpredictable weather patterns and higher frequency of intense storm activities is another effect of global warming, as well as obviously an increase in average global temperatures, which can result in the extinction of species. So if you see in this slide, you can just see a few more examples. So the sea levels are getting higher. Traditional seasonal indicators are changing in traditional lands, such as these sparrows that used to fly around during the wet season aren't there anymore. There's more hot days, which is resulting in more unpredictable and uncontrollable wildfires. And in some places, there's more rain as well. So there's a whole lot of different things happening in different places as a result of all these greenhouse gases. So how does carbon and the other greenhouse gases contribute to climate change? So carbon dioxide and the other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide are getting trapped in the atmosphere, which we spoke about earlier, and this is resulting in changes to the Earth's climate. It's getting hotter and drier in some places and colder and wetter in others, and generally more extreme everywhere. So this is called climate change. Before humans cut down a great deal of trees for farming, running cattle and building houses, there was a lot less carbon in the air. People are trying to find ways to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and carbon farming is one of the solutions to this. So if we want these changes to stop or to not get any worse, we really need to take out a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. So carbon farming is one way that we can do this, and you can be a part of the solution as well. So what is carbon farming and what does that mean? Carbon farming involves changing the way some activities on the land are done to either increase the amount of carbon stored in vegetation and soil or to avoid the release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So examples of these activities include planting trees and changing the way that cattle are managed. You can earn carbon credits for carrying out a carbon farming project and then sell the credits to make money. So we're going to explain this a little bit more later. So some other examples of carbon farming activities that you can do in carbon farming include allowing trees to regrow naturally, planting trees, burning country in the right way and at the right time, and changing the way beef cattle are managed. So carbon farming projects must use an approved method that sets out how the project will be undertaken, measured and verified. In Australia, there are a range of carbon farming methods, each with different requirements, opportunities, risks and costs. These all have approved activities that you can do and also some activities that you're not allowed to do for each method. These methods are approved by the Australian Emission Reduction Fund, or the ERF, which you might hear people call it. So the three main types of methods that we'll look at in Western Australia on the next slide, and these include human-induced regeneration, savanna burning, environmental plantings and forestry. And today we'll be focusing specifically on the human-induced regeneration, or the HIR HIR method, which is the most common type of carbon farming project in Australia. So there's 59 projects of human-induced regeneration carbon farming in Western Australia's southern rangelands. And you can see on the map here, this is the area indicated in orange. Okay, so how do carbon farming projects make money? Carbon farming projects not only improve the health of the planet and the land, but they can earn you credits, which are like a token for carbon dioxide they store or stop from being released. Carbon credits can be sold for money or kept for later and then sold later. So for every tonne of CEO that you store or stop from being released, you get 1 carbon credit. So a tonne of carbon dioxide equals 1 carbon credit. And then for each carbon credit, you can sell that for money. So by doing a carbon farming project, you might get multiple carbon farming credits, which you'll sell for money later on. So let's imagine that you have a carbon farming project that involves growing trees, like human-induced regeneration. For every tonne of carbon dioxide stored in those trees, the trunks, the branches, and the leaves, you can earn carbon credits that are given out by the Australian government's Clean Energy Regulator, or the CER. You might also hear that being called that. These credits can be sold straight away or held onto for later, hopefully when the carbon farming price is a bit higher. You can sell these credits to the Australian Emissions Reduction Fund through a carbon abatement contract, which is a CAC, or to businesses such as airlines or oil and gas companies that need to purchase carbon credits. This can get a bit complex, but the main thing that you need to know is that you'll get credits and you can sell them to different markets, and we're going to talk about this later. Some companies need to buy carbon farming credits to make up for carbon dioxide that they put into the atmosphere. So an airline, for example, is putting a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and to make up for this, they'll buy credits from you who are taking carbon out of the atmosphere on your property to make up for it. So how does a carbon farming project work? Let's get into it a little bit more. If you want to start a carbon farming project, you have to use an approved method, like human-induced regeneration or savanna burning or environmental plantings, those other methods that we spoke about earlier. But today we're going to focus on HIR. So this means you have to do the right activities and follow the rules of that type of project. The project has to be set up properly and registered with the Clean Energy Regulator, or the CER. And every few years, you will carefully measure how many trees you have and how big they are. This shows how many tonnes of carbon dioxide the project has stored or sequestered, and how many carbon credits that you have earned. You'll then get credits for the carbon that has been stored by the project. Sometimes a project will have a contract to supply a certain number of credits, but you might also decide to sell them on an open market and sell them to whoever gives you the best deal. So the amount of money a carbon project can make depends on how many credits it generates over the life of the project, how much it costs to run the project, and how much money the credits are sold for. So human-induced regeneration of a permanent, even-aged native forest is the proper full name of the human-induced regeneration carbon farming projects. And this is why we're going to say HIR in this presentation for short, because that takes too long. So this is a carbon sequestration method that stores carbon in trees. So this is an improved carbon method that's suited to pastoral leases in the southern rangelands of Western Australia across the Gascoyne, Murchison and Goldfields regions. HIR carbon farming projects involve changing the way you manage the animals on the land so that native trees can regrow to above 2 metres in height with 20% shade cover. This can be done by changing the way livestock are grazed, how long and where, so that the saplings can grow and that trees don't get ring-barked or knocked down, as well as by humanely reducing the number of feral animals or removing and controlling weeds so that trees can grow better. So basically, you could be reducing the number of feral animals, controlling weeds, and changing the way that livestock are grazed to allow a section of your property or land to regrow trees naturally. So HIR carbon farming doesn't mean that you have to destock or put up lots of fences. It can be done by moving or closing off bores or using things like salt licks that attract cattle or sheep, if you're going to use them, to where you want them. There are things that you can't do though. For example, you can't plant seeds or seedlings, and you can't use lime or fertilise either. So these trees have to regrow naturally. You can't plant trees and allow them to grow. It has to be something that's done naturally. So HIR activities can improve the productivity of a pastoral lease. They can improve the soil and health water quality and help protect native species of plants and animals and reduce soil erosion. So they're really good for the environment. But it's important to realise that carbon stored by this type of project has to be protected for 25 years from the first time that the carbon credits are issued. This means that a project will last at least 25 years and maybe 30 years from now when the carbon farming project is first registered. So there's risk if the trees within the project die or can't regrow, especially if you've been paid for the carbon stored in them. This could mean that money might have to be repaid later. So this is the only type of carbon farming project that sequesters or stores carbon allowed on pastoral leases. This means that you can't start a project in pastoral leases in Western Australia that involves planting trees. So this image shows an example of how a HIR carbon farming project might be set up on the property. So a project might cover the whole property, but only certain areas within it are used to work out how much carbon is being stored by trees. These are called carbon estimation areas, and you can see this in the image. So you can see this whole thing is a property, okay? And you might have your livestock grazing in the area on the right-hand side. If you block off a little bit of that area where it's green and let those trees regrow, you can still manage your livestock in the other area. The area on the left might just not be in the project as well. So this is your whole property. Your project area for the carbon farming project could be that square, that bigger square on the right-hand side. And within that, you have where your livestock are grazing and where you've separated them to allow the trees to regrow. And in that area, you'll be keeping stock away from them, grazing stock for a shorter period of time. You'll be managing feral animals and planting and plants that don't naturally occur in that area, weeds, and you won't be clearing trees growing in that area as well. If the area is already cleared, like a grazing paddock, it can't be part of a carbon farming project as it can't be growing trees without planting trees or seedlings. So if you have a full paddock that has no growth whatsoever, you can't really do a HIR project there because the trees aren't going to naturally regrow there unless you're planting seedlings. So it has to be somewhere that there's a bit going on already, and that if you do certain activities, it's going to regrow by itself. So in Western Australia, there are 59 registered HIR projects across the Southern Rangelands area. 16 have been registered this year, it's 2020 right now, and there's more expected to be registered over the next couple of years. The reason these projects are here is because pastoral stations are so big. The number of credits you get for each hectare is low, even over 25 years, but with lots of hectares, it will make doing a project worthwhile. So if you only have a small lease, it might not be worthwhile you doing a carbon farming project because for every hectare, you're not getting that much carbon. But if you have a big area, it might make it worthwhile for you to do that in the future. And these are things that you might need to talk about and look at before you sign on to a carbon farming project, and we can help you do that. So carbon farming projects not only help reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air, they also produce benefits that fall into 3 categories, and these are economic, environmental, and community and cultural benefits. These additional outcomes are referred to as co-benefits. So getting back to looking after country can help tackle climate change and the many issues that can arise on a property when the property is managed incorrectly. So carbon farming projects can provide jobs and help people get back on country. As well as earning income from the sale of carbon credits, carbon farming projects can result in many benefits to Aboriginal organisations, including managing country and protecting sacred sites, revitalising connection to country, opportunities for elderly to pass on language and knowledge to younger people, increasing native plants and protecting local native wildlife, training and employment opportunities, and sustaining culture through healthy country and strong communities. So these are just a few examples that people have identified from carbon farming projects, but the image on the screen shows other co-benefits that carbon farming projects can deliver as well. So there are companies that are willing to pay more for a project's carbon credits if the project also creates co-benefits such as that we talked about on the last slide. There's growing demand for projects that produce Aboriginal cultural and economic outcomes as well as environmental outcomes. Co-benefits provide an opportunity for Aboriginal organisations to increase profits from carbon farming projects. If you can demonstrate or verify that your carbon farming project is producing certain types of co-benefits, certain buyers may pay more for carbon credits. However, you'll have to negotiate this with the client. So, carbon farming means being good business people with good relationships with companies that want to buy carbon credits, while still maintaining control over how your story is used and shared. So, companies will pay, or they should pay, a premium price for carbon farming credits with co-benefits. In doing this, they're connecting their brand with the story of the carbon farming project and publicly demonstrating that they support the project deliverers. It's important that Aboriginal organisations develop a good business relationship with these companies to ensure that they retain full control over how their story will be used and shared. So if you contact the Aboriginal Economic Development Project, we can help you do this. The number of carbon credits that you will get can go up and down because you're relying on the growth of trees, and drought can stop them from growing. You could even end up with less trees than you had a few years before. It's important to manage the money from a project carefully and not spend it all at once or let it waste away. So you should be getting the best price for your carbon project credits, just like selling livestock. So shop around and get a good price for these credits. After all, this is an investment in your future, and we want to make sure that you're getting the best price for this. So trees that are in your carbon farming project are reliant on rainfall. Long periods of drought will affect how well they grow, and they might even die. So the money you get every few years is not going to be the same each time. It might be high at the start of your carbon farming project and get lower over time. You need to remember that from the time your carbon farming project is registered, the project could go for up to 30 years and at least more than 25 years. So careful money management and independent financial advice is very important. Only someone with an Australian Financial Services licence, an AFS licence, should give advice about the pricing of carbon credits. And you can ask people if they have that licence before they're talking to you about selling carbon credits and money. So there are a few key things we need to consider when thinking about a HAR carbon farming project. So you need to ask yourself, do you have large areas with trees that have been affected by grazing over the last 10 years? Do these areas have the type of trees that can reach 2 metres in height with 20% canopy cover? Could these areas regrow if they were left alone? Can you manage your stock to protect the regrowth so that it can grow back by itself? Are you willing to protect those trees for more than 25 years? And are there co-benefits that you can produce with this carbon farming project that could help your community and the environment? Setting up and running a carbon farming project creates opportunities, but it can also involve additional costs, and it might open up your business to risk. So you do need to carefully consider the benefits and the costs of taking part in a carbon farming project to make sure it's the right decision for your business and your corporation. So as we mentioned, you can talk to us about this and figure out if it's the right way to go for you. So HAR carbon farming projects might need pastoral leases to reduce the amount of cattle on the land or reduce the amount of feed available to them. So pastoral lessees need to consider how this will impact the income they make from cattle and decide whether they can afford it. So you might have to reduce the amount of stock, or there might be less feed available to them. This could mean that the income that you earn from your livestock business, if you have one, could be less throughout the time that you're doing the carbon farming project. On the other hand, you'll be making money from the carbon farming project. So this might all work out okay, but you need to think about all these different options and make sure that overall, you are getting a profit and it's going to benefit your business. You also need to make sure that you're still undertaking pastoral activities on your pastoral lease. There's a place to manage carbon farming and grazing activities on the lease. They are compatible and they can go together. You will have a higher quality herd with smaller numbers, and this can be profitable if not, this can be more profitable than lots of cattle on poorer country. It's important to balance both the business on the station as well as the carbon farming project. Managing cattle grazing on areas of the lease away from your identified carbon farming areas is important. And it's important to make sure that you plan the two activities together on your property for your conditions. So thinking about what conditions you have on your patch and how you're going to work carbon farming and the livestock business in together. All right, so moving on to the next section. Now we're going to talk about carbon farming project developers. So carbon farming project developers are companies that may help people carry out carbon farming projects. A project developer may also be called a service provider, aggregator, developer, or an agent. Project developers are experienced at designing, implementing, and managing carbon farming projects from start to finish. They may be contracted by a landowner to provide project advice from before the project starts through to the end of the project. Carbon farming project developers are experienced at designing, implementing, and managing carbon farming projects. So some examples of activities that they could provide include advising carbon farming projects, advising on the potential costs, income, risks and benefits of a project, assisting with the project design and activities, incorporating natural resource management plans into the project design, managing project compliance and reporting requirements, including monitoring, auditing and reporting, and assisting the lessee to find a buyer for the carbon credits through the Australian government or the carbon farming market. So as we've mentioned, carbon farming projects are very complex. You might need help from a business to start a project. However, these businesses also need you as you have the rights to the land where carbon farming projects can take place. Businesses don't have to work with project developers and they can start carbon farming projects on their own. However, you might wish to benefit from project developers' expertise in the industry. If you choose to work with a project developer, it's important you work together to develop and agree on clear arrangements and processes to ensure that the project remains Aboriginal-led and maximises the benefits for traditional owners and Aboriginal corporations. For example, you could negotiate with a project developer that you or any local Aboriginal groups or Indigenous ranger groups can undertake contract work, such as feral animal or invasive weed management for the project. You can complete training on various aspects of carbon farming project, and there's also other activities that you could do. So you can be as involved in the carbon farming project that you like. As we've spoken about, you can talk to the Aboriginal Economic Development Unit for advice or assistance on this, and working with project developers to work out an agreement that will benefit both parties. So the Carbon Industry Code of Conduct, or we'll just talk about it and refer to it as the code from now on, provides guidance for project developers, agents, aggregators and advisors undertaking carbon farming projects. This code is voluntary and it was designed to promote market integrity and consumer protection and to promote appropriate interaction with project stakeholders, including registered native title bodies, corporates, land managers and project owners. So the code aims to define industry best practice, promote consumer protection, provide guidance and promote market integrity. A good project developer should be a signatory to the Code of Conduct, and you can make a complaint if someone doesn't follow the Code of Conduct. So one of the first questions you can ask yourself is this carbon farming project developer a signatory to the Code of Conduct? And if no, you might want to reconsider if you want to work together, because this code really does guide people in best practice. People who talk to you about carbon farming projects might be interested, and most probably are interested, in making money from your property, and they might not always give you the whole story. So you always need to seek your own independent advice before signing up to anything, and we can help you do that. So now we're going to get into some of the legal stuff about setting up a carbon farming project. So to carry out a carbon farming project under the Emissions Reduction Fund, you must have the legal right to carry out the project. To have the legal right to carry out a project, you must have the right to carry out project activities on or for the sites or assets included in the project, and a lawful and exclusive right to be issued all Australian carbon credits that may be created as a result of the project activities. So in Western Australia, Aboriginal pastoral lessees have the legal right to carry out human-induced regeneration carbon farming projects. If there are multiple stakeholders involved in a project, arrangements can be made between them to determine who has the legal right to carry out that project. So all parties to a project are required to enter into a deed of agreement with the West Australian Minister for Lands. This deed sets out the roles and responsibilities of the parties to the project, and it must be agreed to before the Minister can consider providing state eligible interest holder consent before the project goes ahead. So we've just mentioned eligible interest holder consent, but what does that mean? So an eligible interest holder is a person or organisation that has a specific legal interest in the land on which a carbon farming project will be conducted. They are able to decide if they support a project or not, and they must give their consent or approval before a project goes ahead. People and organisations that might be eligible interest holders over a pastoral lease include the West Australian Minister for Lands, the pastoral lessee themselves, registered native title body corporates with determined native title, and financial institutions such as banks. The West Australian Minister for Lands is an eligible interest holder, meaning they also have to give consent for a project to go ahead or not, as the pastoral lease is on Crown land. All eligible interest holders must have already given their consent or begun processes to give their consent before the Western Australian state will give consent for a project to go ahead or not, or decide whether they will give consent. If you're an Aboriginal pastoral lessee, either you or the project developer will be responsible for a carbon farming project once it begins, and it's important that you know in advance what this will involve. This should be explained to you by the carbon farming project developer, and you can and should negotiate terms that benefit both you and the project developer. You should know that if you want to undertake a land-based activity on a pastoral lease, you need to ensure that the activity is consistent with the conditions of your lease. If you're an Aboriginal pastoral lessee and a project developer wants to start a carbon farming project on your land, you have the right to decide whether or not that project goes ahead. So you can say yes or no. Under the Australian-wide Carbon Farming Act 2011, or the CFI Act 2011, native title groups are only an eligible interest holder for a carbon farming project if they have determined exclusive or non-exclusive native title claim and a registered body corporate at the time that a carbon farming project is registered. So in summary, if someone is developing a carbon farming project on land where exclusive or non-exclusive possession native title rights have been determined to exist, the RNTBC, or the Registered Native Title Body Corporate, is an eligible interest holder. Unfortunately, this means that if a group's native title claim hasn't been determined yet when the carbon farming project is registered, they are not required to give their consent for the project to go ahead, and this is a really important point. So the Registered Native Title Body Corporate is a primary contact point in relation to eligible interest holder consent and engagement with this group. The RNTBC has the right to negotiate with project developers and should be granted free, prior and informed consent, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. The RNTBC can also withhold consent for a project and establish their own project if they have the legal right to carry out that activity. The RNTBC is the primary contact point in regard to eligible interest holder consent and engagement. The RNTBC has a right to negotiate with project developers, and they need to remember that. We have heard of carbon farming projects in other places in Australia where the Registered Native Title Body Corporate has been offered a 5% share of project value in return for their consent. So whether groups want financial benefits like that or other benefits, we can help you negotiate terms that will benefit both parties. There are a number of situations where Aboriginal organisations need to be engaged and their permission or consent obtained in relation to carbon farming projects. Free, prior and informed consent is based on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or the UNDRIP, which states that Indigenous people have the right to give or deny their free, prior and informed consent for projects that affect them, their rights and interests, their land and their natural resources. This includes carbon farming projects. Free, prior and informed consent is a process as well as an outcome. It's a decision-making process that project developers should use when engaging with Aboriginal organisations to ensure that they're involved from the early stage in decisions about carbon farming projects that affect them. Free, prior and informed consent is a higher standard than simply consulting. When someone is developing a carbon farming project on land that you're an eligible interest holder for, they should act in a certain way. You should be free from force, intimidation, manipulation, coercion, or pressure, meaning that you shouldn't feel pressured by anyone in discussions. Your consent for a project should be obtained prior to the project starting so that you have agreed to the project before anything happens. And you should always be fully informed about the project. You should be told about the costs, benefits, and risks and given the opportunity to seek independent advice on your own. The outcome of this free, prior and informed consent process is providing the right and opportunity for Aboriginal organisation to say yes or no to the land for a carbon farming project based on a comprehensive, accurate, timely and easy to understand process and information. So to effectively obtain free, prior and informed consent, project developers should work with established channels within your corporation to identify all relevant affected people and appropriate mechanisms for engagement. They should engage early and allow you to make decisions in your own time, allow you to make decisions in your own ways, in languages of your choosing, subject to customary laws and decision-making processes. They should build relationships and trust with you through maintaining communications during the life of a project. And they should apply these principles throughout the life of the project, from the very start of the project through to the finish. Okay. So, Aboriginal pastoral lessees and registered native title body corporates might choose to work with a carbon project developer to undertake a project. And before you enter into carbon farming project arrangements, it's important to understand the type of business model that they use. A range of business models are available for project developers to complete carbon farming projects. In each case, the responsibilities of involved parties, as well as how the project developers are paid for their service, will vary. When a project is registered, one person will be responsible for the project. They are called the project proponent. Who the project proponent will be is first and possibly the most important decision that you're going to make in a carbon farming project. Project developers can assist in designing and implementing a carbon farming project, as well as providing the necessary services and support to effectively run a project on your behalf. In return, they charge a fee. This is usually a share of the money made from selling carbon farming credits, paid over the life of the project. To enable the project developer to cover their costs, manage risks, and make a profit, they will ask you to enter into a contract with them. This is a normal arrangement, and a good contract should and will benefit both parties. However, you need to understand what you're signing for. The contract could be for over 25 years, so you need to ensure that you get it right from the start. Make sure you're fully informed and you choose the project partner that's right for you. You could be working with these people for over a decade at least, so you need to make sure that you at least get on with one another. Make sure you completely understand any contract that you're asked to sign before you sign it. You have the right to negotiate with a project developer if you're unhappy with any of their terms. And you can also work with project developers to build agreements into your contract that result in benefits for your community. So this could include practical training or contract work opportunities for your corporation or other local Aboriginal organisations and ranger groups. For example, the project developer could complete training as part of the carbon farming project. Agreements could also be made so that any contract work created by the carbon farming project will be allocated to Aboriginal businesses. For example, feral animal management or weed management work could be contracted to the Aboriginal lessee or another organisation as opposed to a non-Aboriginal business. And these are just examples of ideas that you could work into arrangements, and we can help you negotiate terms such as this. So you might wonder, do you even need to work with a project developer to undertake a carbon farming project? Yes and no, it's up to you. It's possible for an Aboriginal pastoral lessee to start a carbon farming project on their land and complete many of the activities for which the project developer will provide. Alternatively, the Aboriginal pastoral lessee can choose to outsource specific activities that are typically undertaken by a project developer to external technical specialists. However, the costs in this approach will need to be considered. An Aboriginal pastoral lessee may also choose to work with a project developer to benefit from their expertise in running large-scale projects. If this is your preferred approach, it's important to understand how project developers operate, as they can use different business models. So business models that are used by project developers include project service providers or agents, a project aggregator, or not working with a project developer yourself and doing it yourself and paying someone else to assist you on a fee-for-service basis. Before you do any of this, make sure that you do your due diligence and get advice on any contract that you have in front of you before you sign it. So now we're going to go through these different project developer models in a bit more detail. So the project service provider model is a common one in the carbon farming industry and involves the project developer providing multiple services to a lessee and managing many or all of the project activities. Most importantly, in this type of model, the project developer is not the carbon farming project proponent. People who want regulatory and financial control of their carbon farming project will often use this type of model, a project service. The project service provider simply delivers a service to the lessee and has no interaction with the clean energy regulator. However, the lessee has legal and financial obligations with the clean energy regulator themselves. So in summary, under the project service provider business model, the lessee is the project proponent. They carry the financial and legal obligations with the clean energy regulator. They are paid carbon credits and they might have obligations with a third party employed to sell those credits. And they may choose to include conditions in the contract for the project service provider to take on some of these obligations for them. And this diagram just shows how this will work. So you can see in the middle is the pastoral lessee. They are the ones with the legal obligation with the clean energy regulator on the left-hand side, and the ones with the financial obligation. The project service provider is sitting on the other side, just working with the pastoral lessee. So they're not interacting with the clean energy regulator. It's the pastoral lessee here that's in the middle. So this type of model is the project service provider model, and project service providers might also be called agents, project developers, aggregators, or contract authorised representatives. So they have a lot of names. It's important to talk to them about what the actual model looks like, who the project proponent will be, and what roles and responsibilities you will have once you go ahead. So this slide just shows a typical revenue model of how this type of model works. So project service providers generally charge a percentage of the carbon credits created by the project to cover their costs and make a profit. Typically, they use to take a share of the total number of carbon credits. So this is represented by the diagram on the left-hand side over here. Across the carbon industry, they are generally taking about 20 to 30% of the volume or the value of carbon credits produced. This allows project service providers to sell and trade their share of the credits as they see fit. However, in some cases, they might just take a share of the total profit from credits, which is shown by the diagram on the right-hand side. And they're taking a share of the total profit from credits after they've been sold. The two approaches illustrated here are the different models that they may choose. So under this model, it's typical for the project service provider to provide the lessee with advice on trading carbon credits and a brokerage service, in which case they can sell carbon credits for the lessee or arrange a carbon abatement contract, CAC or CAC, with the Australian government for the lessee. So they can manage your carbon credits for you under this model if you like. So the next model that we're going to talk about is a project aggregator. A project aggregator is a project developer who undertakes and manages the project on behalf of the landholder. In this model, the project aggregator is the project owner and the project proponent. A project aggregator typically takes full control of project development and management. They are contracted by a lessee to provide all project advice and to implement and manage the project on behalf of the lessee. The project aggregator also manages the sale of carbon credits and may group credits from multiple properties together under a single sale. The points to note about the project aggregator model are that the project aggregator and lessee share the value of the sale of credits, which gives the lessee a level of assurance that the sale of credits is in the best interest. However, the lessee may not have full control of the sale price of carbon credits. Project aggregators generally work with multiple lessees at once, as shown in this diagram where they're working with 3. This means that they have a larger pool of carbon credits from which they can source, and they can participate in more different types of sales than if they were working with only one property and lessee. So because they have so many credits that they have access to from multiple properties, they might be able to have bigger sales in total, and you might get a better price and a percentage of those credits. Back to you. So the third model is not really working with a project developer at all. It's a do-it-yourself project developer model, which is something that we've called it, and it's hiring services yourself. So a business doesn't have to work with a project service provider or aggregator in the 2 models that we've just discussed. You might choose to do it yourself and hire services on an as-needs basis. You can undertake a carbon farming project on your own using skills and capacity within your organisation. However, you might need to help someone with activities. You might need someone to help you with activities and may need to hire an external business to complete the project with you. You can contract industry experts to help you design, implement, register and manage a carbon farming project. There are also service providers who offer their expertise for one-off fee-for-service activities as required. Substantial costs are incurred at the beginning of the project, and sometimes it takes years before any revenue from a carbon farming project is received. So this should be taken into account when considering the do-it-yourself project developer model. So you might have to spend a lot of money upfront if you're doing it by yourself, and you might not get any profit for quite a while. So you need to think if you can afford this initial expense. So there's a few things that you need to consider when you're working with a project developer if you choose to. The Australian government is not involved with agreements or contracts between lessees, native title holders and project developers, and it does not set or enforce their terms. You should seek legal and financial advice before you enter into any contract, and we can help you do that. Any agreement between you and a project developer should be in writing. If you sign up to a carbon farming project without independent advice, you might be at legal risk if anything goes wrong. If you don't like the deal that you're being offered, you have other options. There may be other project developers that you can work with, or you can do it yourself, as we've just explained. The project developer or their employees should demonstrate a good understanding of how to do project activities and follow carbon farming project rules. Before starting a carbon farming project, you can consider if you know whether the project developer has a good track record and sound financial backing. You can think about whether you understand how much the carbon farming project will cost you, or if you know how much profit you can make over the whole life of the project. The project developer should have a good idea of how many credits the project can produce and how much they can earn when sold. This might affect how much income you get. You may be paid before or after the credits are sold, a fixed price in cash or in kind, such as discounted equipment upgrades, or a percentage of the income from selling credits. The project developer may charge a fee or commission to manage the project. Anticipated income and fees should be clear to everyone before you start the project, and you should know what you're getting into. Okay, So there are some questions that you can ask carbon farming project developers to help you understand the benefits, risks, and legal obligations involved in carbon farming projects. So you can ask, who is in charge of the project? Who will be the project proponent? If I agree to participate in this project, what happens next? Do you have permission from all relevant stakeholders to do this project? How will the project developer sell any credits from the project? How will I be paid, and will I have to pay for any fees? Do you have an Australian financial services license? What happens if the project delivers fewer carbon emissions reductions than estimated? So what happens if we don't deliver or sequester as much carbon as we thought that we would? And will I have any ongoing responsibilities once the project is over, which is going to be in a long time? So this next slide just shows you an image about weighing up the benefits and the cost of doing a carbon farming project. So you should know your estimated income from selling ACCUs, which are just carbon farming credits. And from this income, you're going to take away your estimated cost to run the project. And this will equal your total profit. So you need to weigh this up. How much income are you going to get total? How much is it going to cost you to do the project? And what are you going to be left with in the end? And is it worthwhile you doing that project? So carbon credits are traded in the marketplace, a lot like cattle and livestock. There are brokers and agents who can help you sell your credits or do it for you. Or you can form relationships with buyers and sell them directly by yourself. You can sell credits to a few different buyers. So the first is the federal government through its Emissions Reduction Fund, the ERF. The second is to voluntary buyers such as Telstra, Qantas and Virgin Airlines. And the third is to companies that emit carbon and need offsets such as Shell, BP, BHP and so forth. So these are companies that emit a lot of carbon and they need to replace that carbon by buying it from someone like you. So credits from Aboriginal projects can get a higher price than other credits. Buyers will pay a premium for credits that have a benefit to traditional owners and Aboriginal communities and businesses. The current price of credits in Australia is $16.50, but Aboriginal projects are receiving up to $22 per credit. So you can see that's quite a significant increase in the price that you can get for a carbon farming project if you can demonstrate that you're benefiting Aboriginal communities, corporations or individuals and so on. So now we're going to go through summary. I know we've gone through a lot of information and it's really complex, but all of this is just so that you have an idea about what carbon farming is and the things that you might need to think about. So carbon farming projects are very complex and we now know they last more than 25 years. Carbon farming businesses and other people need your permission if they want to set up a project on your land. Pastoral lessees and native title holders have the right to say yes or no to anyone who wants to do a carbon farming project on their land. You have the right to negotiate with a carbon farming business and you may be able to receive community and financial benefits from carbon farming projects. If you want to set up a carbon farming project, you may need help from a carbon farming business to set it up and manage it for you. There is no rush to sign up for a carbon farming project. This is not the last time you'll be able to start a project and the opportunity will be around for a long time. If you sign up to a carbon farming project without independent advice, you might be at a legal risk if anything goes wrong. So make sure that you get independent legal advice. We can help you do that. And you can call anyone on the Aboriginal Economic Development team within that team for independent advice or information about carbon farming projects. So there's multiple services and organisations that can assist you in setting up a carbon farming project or exploring your options. So you should contact us as your first point of call and we can connect you with the relevant organisation and help you get assistance. We can help you organise a directors meeting and attend that meeting to talk about carbon farming project and explain it to everyone if you like. If you're interested in undertaking a carbon farming project, you can contact us and we'll discuss the opportunities and risks. So our contact details via email again are aed@dpird.wa.gov.au That's aed@dpird.wa.gov.au. Or you can call me directly and I'll help you get in touch with everyone. And my number is 0459 867 908. So thank you for taking the time to watch today. Contact us if you have any questions or want to talk about carbon farming further, and we'd be happy to help you out.